Thank you. I'm honored to be here and honored to have a chance to give my views on Europe to Europeans. This is, of course, a dangerous thing to do. But many Europeans have given Americans advice on how to run their country. So this is my turn. I said that I'm American, but that is not altogether true. I was born in Hungary in 1949. This was a very bad time to be born in Hungary. My parents left when I was 6 months old because the People's Republic had been declared and they had to leave or bad things would happen. They escaped to America, a place where all things are possible. But my childhood was a European childhood. We spoke only Hungarian. And around the dinner table, the conversation was about the dead, the missing, and how it all happened. And I remember that in 1956, living in New York, when the tanks rolled into Budapest, my mother was watching television and recognized their house on Kazinczy utca being shelled by tanks. So I lived a dual childhood. And the original sin of Europe was that even as it conquered the world, it had an endless, unsettlable civil war going on inside of Europe. The Portuguese against the Spaniards against the French against the British, finally the Germans against everyone. From 1945 to 1991, Europe was occupied, directly occupied, 1989, directly occupied by the Soviets, and much more subtly occupied by the Americans. But the question of war and peace was not being made in Warsaw, Berlin, Rome. It was being made in Washington and Moscow. If there was going to be a European war, it was not going to happen because of a misunderstanding because of the French and the Germans. It was going to happen because of a decision between the Americans and the Soviets. But it was the great fortune of Europe at that point that its sovereignty was suspended. And that the decisions of war and peace, of life and death, were being made by Americans and the Soviets, who fully understood the consequences of war. The European Union existed as a sovereign entity, I will argue, from 1991 to 2008. Where Europe no longer became a potential battleground of foreign powers, but regained its sovereignty. There are 4 reasons for the construction of the EU. First, the Cold War. It grew out of the American Marshall Plan. It grew out of the American concept that in order to defeat the Soviets, a prosperous Western Europe was necessary, and the idea that somehow intensified trade would facilitate this. It is not that the Europeans didn't create it, but in a certain sense the Americans sponsored it. The second purpose was to avoid war. It was the idea that if Germany was linked to France, was linked to other countries by prosperity, it wouldn't risk war. But notice that this all assumed one thing: prosperity. The idea of the Cold War, the idea of uniting Germany and France, of the incentive to be democratic, the global voice, all assumed not only that there would be a European Union, but it would be prosperous, that would motivate people to work together. And the fear was always the nightmare of the past, that the European past would return if this failed. The crisis of 2008, of course, was that the period in which the automatic prosperity of the European Union ended. It became hard. Now what had to happen was something different. The management of austerity. The problem of Europe is that its only consensus was prosperity. It has no consensus on austerity. Behind everything is the fear of the reemergence of nationalism. But I would argue that nationalism has reemerged. When the Europeans meet, the Greeks speak for the Greeks, the Germans for the Germans, the Spaniards for the Spaniards, and the bureaucracy claims to speak for everyone. What do we mean when we talk about nationalism? We mean, more than anything else, shared fate. I may be a Hungarian, if I were, and I may not like Hungary, but when the Wehrmacht comes in, I share the fate. I love America, and I like Americans. I love my own, and my fate is shared with them. And what happens to them happens to me, and their fate matters to me. And this is the foundation of community. What does it mean in this context? If I'm a 25-year-old Greek, I am facing a world in which I may not have a job for the next 10, 15 years. I can't buy an apartment. I possibly can't get married. For if you're 25 and you face 15, 20 years of austerity, which one of your hopes will be realized? Which one of your dreams? You understand a generation whose dreams are lost. The life of a Greek today will look very different from the life of a 25-year-old German who does not face that, who does not face an impoverished existence of limited possibilities, lost hopes, no dreams. In what sense are they part of the same community? And what this crisis has done is remind everyone of who they share their fate with. Out of all of this comes the perpetual European problem for the past century and a half, the German question. Ever since 1871, Europe had to face the fact that at the center of Europe was one of the most dynamic economic forces imaginable, but one profoundly insecure geopolitically. Sitting on the North European plain, surrounded in the east and the west by potential enemies, rich, powerful, creative, and quite frightened. The EU tried to take Germany and put it into Europe, and it worked. And now Germany has popped out again. What do I see in the future? I see the nation state. But the question that really rests is, what is the relationship between Germany and Russia? This is an old question and a dangerous one. Germany depends on Russian natural gas. Germany has a place to export technology. The Russians have money. If you can find the bank they hid it in. So there is a relationship, an alternative for Germany. It is the historic alternative. It is one that Germany examined in the 1870s, had to deal with in the 1938-39 period. It is there. And what is also there is Poland. There are two things that I have to say to Poland. Poland has as its major national strategy looking for someone else to take care of it. This is not a national strategy. This is hope. Your latest hope is the EU. An entity that cannot even decide the most fundamental questions of solving this crisis you are looking to protect your national security from. It has no army. How will it protect you? It can't make decisions. Poland must now depend on itself. Why? It's a nation of 38 million. It has a vibrant economy. It has highly intelligent, educated people. And it is rising. I will put a more radical idea forward to you, which I think is fundamental, one that we get from General Pilsudski, the intermarium. The intermarium basically says we are caught between Germany and Russia, and that stinks. We would like to move to Sweden, but we can't. So we must become a very difficult morsel to swallow. And we can't become that ourselves. And he proposed the intermarium, an alliance of nations between the Baltic and the Black Sea. Neither German nor Russian, but self-sufficient, and then able to, in his mind, enter into a relationship with France. Because he knew that France could not come if Poland couldn't survive for 6 weeks, for more than 6 weeks. Enough time to be a morsel. How did Switzerland survive? It was easier not to attack it than to attack it. There are nations in Europe who've survived simply by being too much trouble to fight with. Poland must become too much trouble. But Poland must also have a free trade zone with countries who need Polish exports, need to be aligned with Poland, need to be led by Poland. Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, even Turkey, are all countries in crisis of various sorts. The interesting thing about Poland is you're not in crisis. When I look at Europe, everyone's in crisis. Poland isn't. There is a moment of leadership here that Poland can undertake in working with the United States to create a stable environment. An alliance with the United States from the Polish point of view consists of what will you give me that I don't have to pay for. That's not an alliance. An American alliance with Poland must be founded on the idea of Poland as a self-sufficient leader in the region that the United States can rely on. We are not France. We will come, but you have to be here. If you all move to Sweden, there's nothing we can do. This last piece is advice that sounds archaic. How can you speak of General Pilsudski? How can you think of the intermarium? How can you think of Polish leadership? The answer is, how can I not? When I see what has happened to NATO, when I see what has happened to the European Union, when I see how Poland is developing, how can I not think this way? Europe is returning to history. The Great Party is over. 91 to 2008 was wonderful. It will not return. A future now has to be made, and for 2,000 years, the future of Europe was built on states. You are living in one of the most dynamic and important states of Europe, and you can help shape it, not by writing position papers and going to meetings, but far more importantly, by taking steps to protect your sovereignty and to assert your power. It is not that what I am saying is archaic. It was that the period of 1991 and 2008 was an anomaly. It was not real. It merely happened, and now is over. Step back, take a look at your country, take a look at the chaos around you in Europe, and take control of your fate. This is what the next 50 years will look like. And you will be a leading power in it.